December 4th, 1972, in the small town of Elmridge, California. For most, it was just another ordinary day. But for the Weston family, it would mark the beginning of an endless nightmare. The sun was already setting when 7-year-old Natan Weston walked home from school. The path was familiar, simple, the same every afternoon. But that night, something sinister waited for him, hidden behind an apparently harmless smile. Natan was known for his innocence, a loving son, a caring brother, always eager to help. As he walked, he had no idea that eyes were watching him from the shadows. Across the street, a man approached with practiced calm. He carried pamphlets in his hands, wore a gentle smile, and spoke in a soft, trustworthy voice. His name was Leonard. At first glance, he seemed like a messenger of faith. In truth, he was the doorway to terror. Leonard handed out pamphlets about a local church. His voice was low, inviting, almost hypnotic. He politely asked Natan if his mother might have something to donate. The boy, kind and trusting, said yes. The stranger then offered him a ride, promising to take him safely home. To Natan, it sounded like a good deed. To Leonard, it was only the first step of a macabre plan, prepared long before that casual encounter. Natan hesitated for a moment, but agreed. The parked car looked ordinary, showing no sign of danger, yet behind the wheel wasn't Leonard. The driver was another man, Martin Caldwell. His eyes didn't smile. Cold, unblinking, they studied the boy like someone who had already chosen his fate. Leonard played the role of trust, but Caldwell was the true predator. A history of lies and crimes clung to him like a shadow. Martin Caldwell was no ordinary man. He had already been arrested for impersonating a police officer, fooling families with fake uniforms. His life was marked by abuse, fraud, and manipulation. Leonard, fragile and easily influenced, became his perfect accomplice. Martin convinced him they were on a spiritual mission, chosen to guide a child toward divine paths. But faith wasn't driving Martin. It was hunger, a hunger for absolute control. The car drove along unfamiliar routes, empty roads, trees forming dark tunnels, the air growing colder inside and out. Confused, Natan asked why they weren't going to his house. The only reply was silence. Martin's hard stare in the rearview mirror crushed any hope. The routine of a school day had twisted into a one-way trip, leading straight into darkness. The boy's life was shifting into a nightmare he could not escape. Their destination was an isolated cabin buried deep in the Grey Ridge Valley Mountains, a place forgotten by the world, where screams were swallowed by the wind. Once there, Leonard stepped aside, his role complete. Now, Natan was left alone with Martin. In that moment, the mask fell. The false kindness vanished, replaced by a cruel predator's glare. The boy felt the ground disappear beneath him. Fear became his only companion. Still hoping, Natan asked when he would return to his family. Martin's reply shattered him. "You're not going back. Your parents didn't want you. Now you're mine." In seconds, the child's identity was ripped away. Martin forced him to answer to another name, Lucas Caldwell. This was not just a physical abduction, it was the beginning of a psychological war meant to erase who he was and bury him under someone else's lies. That first night was endless. Natan wept in silence, trapped in fear and confusion. Martin's cruelty followed a twisted pattern, threats followed by false tenderness. A small gift, then sudden violence. He gave just enough to create dependence, then tore it away. It was a methodical way to break him. The boy no longer knew what was real. The safe world he once trusted was dissolving, leaving only shadows and manipulation. Time bent inside the cabin. Minutes stretched into hours. Fragile, Natan began to believe the lie Martin repeated over and over, that he was unwanted, abandoned, unlovable. Each phrase was a brick building walls inside his mind. There were no chains, no locks, But there was something worse: manipulation. It turned freedom into an illusion and hope into obedience. The boy's body was untouched by shackles, but his spirit was already captive. The following days blurred into a cycle of fear. Martin fed Natan scraps of hope, only to crush them moments later. He told the boy his family had abandoned him, that no one was looking. With each repetition, the lie felt more like truth. The boy who once smiled now sat in silence, staring into nothing. What was breaking wasn't just his body, it was his very sense of self, his fragile identity dissolving piece by piece. Leonard appeared occasionally, bringing supplies and mumbling about God, pretending this was some sacred mission. In truth, he feared Martin, but was already trapped in his web. To Natan, Leonard was just another confusing figure reinforcing the lie. Adults were supposed to protect, but instead they betrayed. Childhood was slipping away, replaced by fear and manipulation, each day burying him deeper in a nightmare without end. Martin forced Natan to answer only as Lucas Caldwell. He declared that Natan Weston no longer existed. Each correction felt like a piece of his soul being ripped away. It was a prison without chains, but with invisible walls closing in. He no longer knew if he had a family, if anyone searched for him, or if he was truly alone in the world. The cruelest kidnapping wasn't of his body, but of his mind. Weeks passed before Martin decided to change the scenery. He moved with the boy to the small town of Redbrook. There, he wore a perfect mask, presenting himself as a single father. He enrolled Lucas in the local school, as though he were just another child. To neighbors and teachers, they looked like a normal family. No one suspected the truth. Normality was the predator's best disguise, while the real Natan vanished further into silence. At school, the boy pretended to adapt. He answered to his false name, played along with classmates, and hid the pain. Inside, he screamed. Missing posters hadn't reached this region, a simple but fatal detail. Martin seized it. "See, no one's looking for you." With no access to truth, the boy believed him. His freedom stood just beyond reach, but he couldn't see it. The invisible chains held tighter than any lock ever could. Life in Redbrook fell into routine. Martin worked odd jobs, played the role of a dedicated father, and built an image of care. He picked the boy up from school, greeted neighbors politely, and no one suspected. The monster wasn't hiding in shadows, but thriving in plain sight, protected by his false mask. Meanwhile, Natan sank deeper into silence and despair. The prison walls weren't visible, but they were impossible to escape. Sometimes Natan was left alone at home. The door stood right there. The street was only a few steps away, yet he never fled. The reason was simple. He believed Martin's lies. He thought his parents had rejected him, that no one wanted him. To the boy, running meant going into nothing, into a world that didn't care. And so, the psychological prison proved stronger than any bars of iron, keeping him bound by shame and fear. Time darkened Natan's eyes. The childlike sparkle faded, replaced by shadows of sadness. The cheerful boy had become withdrawn, quiet, broken. Martin noticed the change and, in his sick mind, began to lose interest. To him, the perfect prey was weak and defenseless. Natan no longer fit that mold, and so the predator turned his gaze elsewhere. He hungered for a new victim, eager to repeat the twisted cycle of horror again. Martin gave Natan a dreadful command: bring another child. The boy, scarred by trauma, refused. Inside he screamed. He would never wish on another what had been done to him. Outwardly he pretended obedience, but secretly sabotaged each plan. He told Martin there were no chances, that parents were nearby, that no one would accept a ride. He invented excuses, delaying every attempt. Resistance became his hidden act of courage. Frustrated, Martin sought another accomplice. he found Dylan Ross, a teenager from Natan's school. He lured him with money and promises, giving him a task: attract a blonde little boy from nearby Huntington Creek. Dylan agreed, seduced by greed. The plan seemed simple: just bait the child and deliver him. The stage was set for the nightmare to repeat itself, this time in broad daylight, with new hands feeding the machinery of terror. Dylan approached the little boy in Huntington Creek. His name was Tommy Whitaker, only 5 years old. Dylan pretended to need help, repeating rehearsed lines. The child hesitated, fear flashing in his eyes. He tried to run home, but Martin would not allow it. The car sped forward, cutting off escape. The quiet street turned into a grotesque chase where innocence was hunted like prey with no chance of defense. Tommy clung to a fence, his tiny hands trembling. His nails tore against the wire, his cries echoing through the neighborhood. But no one came. Dylan yanked him violently, shoving him into the car. The boy screamed, sobbing uncontrollably, disbelief written on his face. In the back seat, Natan watched, his stomach twisting. He knew exactly what awaited the child. He had already lived the nightmare Tommy was about to endure. The car drove straight to Redbrook, and the ritual repeated itself. Once home, Martin cut Tommy's hair, changed his clothes, and gave him a new name. He told him his parents no longer wanted him, that now he belonged to another family. The same performance, the same poisonous lie. But this time there was one difference. Natan knew the truth. Looking into Tommy's eyes, he saw his own reflection years earlier, entering the abyss. Inside Natan, something awakened. It wasn't just fear, it was fury, clarity. He realized with brutal certainty that Martin had always lied. His parents had never abandoned him. Everything he'd been forced to believe was a calculated deception. Watching Tommy cry, he knew if he did nothing, the child would be destroyed just as he had been. From that moment on, Natan stopped being only a victim. He became a guardian of another life. With Tommy's arrival, Natan's behavior changed. He no longer thought only of survival, but of protection. He watched Martin closely, memorizing every word, every gesture. At night, he sat with Tommy, holding his hand, silently promising never to let go. The trauma still lived in him, but now he had a new purpose: to break the cycle. And for the first time in years, a spark of courage flickered within him. The following days became a mission. Natan arrived home from school early to guard Tommy, kept Martin distracted, and tried to keep the boy as far away as possible. They shared a bed like brothers, and Natan consoled him when he cried for his parents. He lied gently, telling him everything would be okay. The lie tore at his soul, but he knew Tommy needed hope to survive. His role was protector now, no matter the cost. Tommy cried endlessly, begging for his parents. Natan hugged him, whispering comfort. Each sleepless night deepened his resolve. They had to escape, not just for himself, but for Tommy. The 7-year-old boy who once vanished was gone. In his place stood a teenager scarred by trauma, but with a sense of duty far beyond his years. He carried on his shoulders the weight of saving someone else from the abyss. Martin's job as a night security guard became their chance. For a few hours the house was empty. It wasn't much, but enough. Natan planned every detail: what to take, when to leave, how to keep Tommy calm in the darkness. The risk was enormous. A single mistake could mean being dragged back into hell, but it didn't matter. Freedom was no longer just a dream. It was a necessity, and it was now or never. On a rainy night, the opportunity came. Martin left for work, and Natan's heart pounded like a drum. Quietly, he wrapped Tommy in a blanket, grabbed a few clothes, and opened the door. The town slept. Rain masked their footsteps. Barefoot, they walked through the wet asphalt. Tommy cried softly, exhausted. When his legs failed, Natan lifted him in his arms. Each step was a pact between courage and fear, hope and despair. They walked for miles with no clear direction. Hunger gnawed, the cold cut like a blade. Yet Natan refused to stop. He knew each minute brought them closer to freedom. Finally, a glow appeared ahead. Huntington Creek District Police. The sign felt like salvation. Kneeling before Tommy, Natan whispered, "Go, say your name. They'll take you home." It was his last desperate gamble, a prayer wrapped in trembling determination. Tommy froze, clinging to Natan's arm, afraid of being separated from the only protector he knew. A police officer noticed them, approached, and saw the desperation in their eyes. Exhausted, Natan confessed everything: the abduction, the false name, the years of lies and abuse. Every word aged him beyond his years. That night, a silence of 7 years finally cracked, and the weight of truth began to fall on the authorities. The next morning, Martin Caldwell was arrested without resistance. His face showed no regret, no fear. His record revealed a history of crime, abuse, fraud, kidnapping. Yet he had never been officially registered as a sex offender. That failure in the system had allowed him to live in anonymity for years. To many, the arrest looked like an ending. In reality, it was only the beginning of exposing a nightmare far larger. Authorities chose to split the trials, one for Natan's abduction, another for Tommy's. The goal was to organize the mountain of crimes, but it also unveiled a disturbing truth. In court, Martin's lawyer argued coldly, Natan could have escaped at any time, so it wasn't continuous kidnapping. The words struck like a blade, twisting blame toward the victim, as though survival itself were evidence against the boy who had suffered. The prosecution fought back. They argued Natan was a prisoner of the mind, conditioned by years of manipulation. A clinical psychologist explained Martin's methods: alternating abuse with gestures of affection, small gifts, false promises. It was a prison without walls, more cruel than iron chains. Natan truly believed he was unwanted, that no one searched for him, that Martin was his only family. His reality had been rewritten. The expert's words cut through the courtroom. It became clear that Natan had been locked inside a world of lies. His parents had searched, posted flyers, cried through endless nights, but he never knew. Martin had blocked the truth, ensuring the boy saw only abandonment. The crime wasn't just physical, it was mental mutilation. A childhood stolen, a soul bent to the will of a predator who thrived on erasing identity. In the end, Martin was sentenced. 8 years and 8 months for Nathan's kidnapping and an additional year and 8 months for Tommy's. But something shocked everyone. No sexual abuse charges were included. The crimes had happened outside the county's jurisdiction and were considered expired under the law at the time. Natan, who had endured the unthinkable, would never see full justice. The sentence felt like a bitter half-victory. Martin entered prison in February 1982. By April 1985, he was out on parole. Only 3 years behind bars for a man who had shattered lives. Leonard Myers, the first accomplice, received time for aiding. Dylan Ross, the teen who helped kidnap Tommy, was sent to juvenile detention. Public outrage exploded. Newspapers printed Natan's face everywhere. He became not just a survivor, but a symbol of injustice and resilience. When Natan finally returned home, nothing matched his expectations. 7 years had passed. His face, now shaped by adolescence and invisible scars, no longer resembled the missing child on posters. His parents still saw a little boy, but he had returned almost as a man. That emotional distance was an unbridgeable gap. "I came back as a stranger in my own home," he admitted years later, words heavy with sorrow. The reunion brought joy, but also pain. The house was the same, the smells familiar, but he no longer fit within it. His parents tried to set rules, schedules, limits. For Natan, after years of false freedom, it felt like another cage. His father, once warm, no longer embraced him the same. The bond was fractured. No matter how hard they tried, the emotional reconnection never came. He carried wounds no one could see. Natan pressed forward, trying to rebuild. He married Julia, had 2 children, worked hard. He spoke at support programs, sharing his story, giving strength to other survivors. Yet the past remained a shadow, whispering memories he could never fully escape. Even as life seemed to settle, tragedy lurked ahead. Fate had not finished with him. Years later, an accident on a rainy night would seal his story with finality. September 16th, 1989. Natan had just finished his shift at a pizza parlor. Rain poured outside. His boss offered him a ride, but he refused. Without a driver's license, he didn't want trouble. He climbed onto his motorcycle and drove into the storm. He didn't know these would be his final miles. At a sudden intersection, a car cut across. The impact was brutal. Natan wasn't wearing a helmet. Rushed to the hospital, he fought for less than an hour. At just 24, his life ended. The news devastated not only his family, but the entire community that had followed his story. 4 days later, more than 500 people filled the local church. Among them was Tommy Whitaker, now a teenager who helped carry the coffin. The child he once saved was now saying goodbye to his protector. On the coffin's lid was a single phrase, simple yet powerful, "Coming home." Words that broke every heart, symbolizing both tragedy and release. Natan had never found true peace in life, but his courage had changed destinies. He saved Tommy, exposed a predator, and became a symbol of resilience. His legacy could not be erased. His story would live on, carried by the countless lives he had touched. Meanwhile, Martin Caldwell walked free since 1985. No ankle monitor, no public registry of his crimes. To the system, he had paid his debt. But monsters rarely change. In January 2003, his name returned to headlines. He tried to pay a nurse $500 to kidnap another boy. The nightmare threatened to repeat itself, yet this time the ending would be different. The system would not look away again. Horrified, the nurse reported him immediately. Justice moved swiftly. Under California's 3 strikes law for violent repeat offenders, Martin was sentenced to life in prison. At 72, he faced the punishment without remorse. In court, Tommy Whitaker, now an adult, took the stand. His voice was steady, but his eyes still carried the weight of that night decades earlier, a memory that would never fully fade. During the trial, Natan's words from years earlier were read aloud. His testimony, frozen in time, echoed like a ghost in the courtroom. It was as if the boy himself had returned to face his captor. Martin showed no reaction, only the same empty indifference that had defined him. Yet this time, the court sealed his fate. Justice, though delayed, finally chained the predator who had haunted so many lives. In January 2008, only 4 years into his life sentence, Martin Caldwell died in prison. He died as he lived, alone, despised, forgotten. No one mourned him, no candle lit his grave. He was buried without honor, a name the world wanted erased. For many, it was too late. The damage he caused had already scarred lives beyond repair. But his end brought at least a quiet closure to decades of horror. Tommy Whitaker chose a different path. Inspired by Natan's courage, he became a police officer. He served in the Elmridge Sheriff's Department, built a family, and tried to turn his scars into strength. The shadow of the past never left, but he transformed it into purpose. Each victim he helped reminded him of the boy who once saved him. In every case, he honored Natan's sacrifice with action and resolve. The Weston family's tragedy never vanished. It echoed in articles, books, even in cinema. The film The Black Phone, released years later, carried echoes of this brutal tale. Kidnapped children, psychological captivity, silent courage. But fiction could never match the truth. Natan's story wasn't a script. It was lived in blood, tears, silence, and bravery. A reminder that evil isn't always distant. Sometimes it lives next door. In the end, this isn't just a story about monsters. It's proof that evil hides behind smiles in ordinary homes disguised as kindness. Yet it's also proof that even in the abyss, courage can rise. Natan Weston didn't conquer every demon, but he saved a life, and that made him immortal. His memory warns us monsters exist, but so does the bravery to face them, even when hope seems lost.